Alright, so from time to time we get this topic of updating the firmware by changing the parameters. This would be to change your return to home speed, return to home height. You can even change when your battery alarm goes off and when you get your forced landing. You can change height restrictions. That's one of the reasons I'm not crazy about doing this video. And the reason for that is, people take out that height restriction and then they go and do something stupid like flying up into the clouds. And that's just not a very smart thing to do for obvious reasons. Perhaps maybe not too obvious because people do it. But right now, that's not something this hobby needs. We don't need the negativity. And if people keep doing that, then this hobby is going to be very hard to enjoy. I don't want to have to fill out a piece of paper every time I fly or get permission or have Big Brother know my every move and where I'm flying at. I practice safe flying. I'm not going to say I've never gone too high or out of line or sight, but I'm not going out and flying up in the clouds and around airports and such. So basically use this tool smart, stick within the rules of the hobby, and don't be one of those that is doing something stupid with this tool and then posting it all over Facebook and YouTube for everybody to see. That's what gives us a bad name. So here we go. This works for all the 501 models. They all share the same FC. That is one thing all the 501 models have in common. They share the same FC. The firmware modding tool that you're going to use, it's pretty current right now, up to the new version for the new Compass, which is the latest firmware for the 501. And this one here is the 501A. It has the new Compass in it. And it doesn't look like a 501A except for the X on the front of it, but I've changed the shell and I got rid of all the gold. And I did a little bit of a light modification in the nose and added the leg extensions to it. But it is a 501A with the new Compass in it. So we are on the most current firmware for that. What you're going to want to do is you're going to take your micro USB cable and you plug it into the back of the quad. You do not need to plug in your battery, although there are some that have said that it will not install without plugging in the battery. So there is a difference. I don't know exactly what that difference is because I've never had to plug in a battery. I have never done this mod to this quad, so we might need to plug in the battery. Hopefully that'll happen and then you'll know how to do it. But I've got my micro USB plugged into the back of the quad, and now I'm going to go and plug the other end of the USB. Let me grab the right one. And we're going to plug this into the side of my laptop. I don't think I need to show you that. You should know where your USB port is. And we're going to go to the computer screen now. So on the computer, we're going to open the tool. I click the right side of the mouse and then I run as administrator. You can just double click it and open it. That's strictly up to you. And click yes at this prompt. And here's our tool. So there's different ways that we can do this, and bear with me, I haven't done this in a long time, so I don't know if I remember all of the parameters. I don't know all the parameters, but I don't know if I remember the ones that I should be remembering right now. But anyhow, this is where you actually take the firmware that you downloaded and place it here, and you make your changes to the parameters, and then you save it to that firmware. Once you've done that, you have to install that firmware in the quad. So that's kind of a longabout way to do it, and there is a faster way to do it, and that's if you just go straight into the EEPROM. And what that is you'll see right here it says connected. We're going to get the parameters off of the quad, so therefore we're getting the firmware off of the quad. We're going to get the parameters for that, and we're going to make those changes, and those will apply to the firmware that's already on the quad. There is no reason to reinstall the firmware. Basically all you're doing is saving it. So if you notice, this is not highlighted. The get params is not highlighted right now, so I have to click restart. Now I can click that and get my parameters. Sometimes you have to do this a couple times. Okay, so as you see, it did not get them. I'm going to click restart again, get params. I guess I'm one of the ones that needs to hook up my battery. Alright, so I don't know how to do this, but we're gonna figure it out. Usually if you plug in your battery while you're already connected to the computer, you're going to get the alarm on your 501. I don't know if this tool will bypass that or not. I doubt it, but let's find out. So we're going to plug it in. Wait for our beeps, the normal startup beeps. Now, there's the alarm. So the way to get past that is you unplug the battery, then you unplug the USB from your computer. Hopefully this is going to work, but you re-plug in the battery without this being hooked up to your computer. Wait for your startup beeps. Okay, so now we're going to plug this into the computer again, and we are good. So let's go back to the computer, and the tool says we are connected. We're going to click restart. Okay, let's do this. There's obviously a method here that I don't know, but let's unplug. And let's unplug from the computer. And I'm just going to repeat the process and see if it works. So we're unplugged. And I'm going to plug it back into the computer. Wait for it to say connected on the screen. And I'm going to click, okay, now I can get params here. I don't have to click restart. Let's see if it does it. Voila. Okay. So there we go. For my case, I did have to plug in the battery. And I had to do it in a two-step process in order to get this to work out. So hopefully you followed that well and you understand it. So basically, we had to plug in the battery, we got the alarm. So what you want to do there is you want to unplug the battery, unplug from your computer, re-plug in the battery, plug back into the computer, click restart, and get your params. If the get params is already highlighted, you don't have to click restart, just click get params. And then you may have to restart the process of unplugging and plugging in the battery like I did. So let's get back to the program or the tool. And you'll see now we have all the parameters that are stored within my firmware. So let's go over what I know or what I remember. This is that right there, 68 is your 6.8 volts for your alarm voltage. That's when you'll start to get the battery alarm. So at 6.8 volts, you're going to get the battery alarm warning you that your battery is low. And you can change that, but I don't change that. I have in the past. And then 6.4 volts is when you're going to get your forced landing, and you can change that as well. I do not advise that you go down real low with that, because you don't want to damage your battery by taking it to a very low level. And the only reason I would change the landing voltage is if you are one that flies long range all the time out of sight, and run that risk when you get back, coming back on a very low battery. This way, when you're on your way back, you're not going to get that forced landing. And a very good example of that is I have a friend in my Facebook group that was out flying. He went real far out. He was up on a mountainside or a big hillside, and when he came back, he just barely had enough battery left on these settings, and it did a forced landing basically, but it did that forced landing down on the side of the mountain, which he had to descend and go get the quad. So had he made this change, he would have had just enough battery to get back. But again, taking it too low can be unsafe for your battery, but that's where you weigh out, do I want to lose a battery or do I want to lose a quad? So for those of you who fly long distance, this might be good for you. Again, I do not change the voltages, the voltage parameters, but that's what those are. And then we have the navigation max speed. This is your return to home speed. It's set for 5, and that's 5 meters per second. And this I do change because I do like my quad to return home faster. However, don't think you're going to go too far with it, please, because you're not. The highest you want to go with it is 7, and if you go to 8, that's when you're going to see it starting to act a little oddly or not so stable. It will not be as stable in 8, and then definitely if you go above 8, you're asking for trouble. So I never recommend ever going above 7. 7 is the maximum speed that I would set this to. So we're set at 7 meters per second. And then we're going to go over here, and we have the safe altitude. This is my return to home height. That's way too low for me. I do not like coming back at 10 meters because I have a lot of trees. So if I'm not flying it back myself, I want to reset that to height that works for me. I need a minimum of 25 meters, so that's where I'm setting mine. Then we have the radius limit. This right here is basically how far out you can go with your quad. So this right now has 0 set, and that means you have no restriction. You can fly that thing as far out as it'll allow as far as a signal or battery. Some people call that geofencing. You're not creating your own geofencing. Geofencing, we're getting into the government and stuff. Someone else creates geofencing and stops you from flying into that area. You're creating a limit. That's all you're doing. So this is set for 0. If you only want to fly, say, out 500 meters, then you set it for 500. Most people want to leave that at 0. You don't want to have that wall that you hit. Depending on where you fly, maybe it's good, maybe that's something you want to use, then you can set that. If you don't want to fly over the water, yet you live near the ocean and you're 500 meters away from the ocean, then you could set it for 500 meters and you would never go above the ocean, basically, is what that does. So you're setting your own limit. You're not actually putting in a geofence. People like to make it sound a lot more high-tech than it really is. So we're going to leave that at 0. I can control how far I go, and I don't go far, but I don't need to put that wall in there. And then we have the altitude limit. This is the one I'm uncomfortable with. The altitude limit is set for 250 meters. 250 meters is more than enough height. You can't see the quad. Yeah, you might get some really great pictures being that high, or good video. So this is where I'm not comfortable with this tool, because everybody is going to set it to 0, which is going to give you no limits whatsoever, and you can fly up into the clouds, and that's extremely dangerous. I do not recommend it. I am not responsible for anybody that does it, and you are doing this at your own risk. And I can only just tell you, please be smart and don't go flying above the law. So that I'm going to put back to 250 and leave it alone. And that's really all I know. I don't know what all the other ones are, and I really don't know that there's anything all that important to change. So I would leave the rest alone. If you find out what the others are and they are something that can work for you, then by all means play with them, test them out, see if you see a difference or anything like that. So here we've gone and made the changes. The only changes I've made is I've changed my return to home speed. I did not change the voltage. I changed my return to home height, and then I left my radius limit alone, and I left my altitude limit alone. So from there we're going to click flash. So from there it has saved everything onto the quad. These are all the settings now. It's locked in the firmware, and we can go back and double check to make sure it's stuck. So let's turn that, close that, start it. We're probably going to have to redo the battery and everything again. Go to EEPROM. Yeah, so we're going to have to redo this whole battery part. So here goes the alarm. That beep sounded even different. That one was like a hyper. So now we are disconnected the battery, and we disconnected the USB. We are going to connect the battery. Wait for the startup beeps. Now we're plugging back into the computer. Wait for it to say connected. And click get params. And there you go, they stuck. So our 7 is still there, my 25 meters is still there, everything is still there. So whatever you've changed, after you click flash, it will stay. So if I go and do an update with this and change the firmware, all these settings that I just made, they should stay. And how they do that, I don't know exactly, but I do like it. So I'll go over the rest of it with you real quick here, and just show you. Here's the TX transmitter firmware. Again, it only works for version 4.2.24, and I loaded that on my laptop, on my desktop, so we can go and stick that in there and try it out. Here's 4.2.24. You load that firmware onto the tool. So there it is. And now we can make changes to the actual display of the TX. And this is for the standard TX only, version 4.2.24. So you can go and pick different things, and you can change the color. So here are the current color settings, and let's pick something here. check gyro sense. I don't know why it doesn't say sensor. I think it's supposed to say sensor. At least I think mine says sensor on my screen. Calibrate Compass, control telemetry, RSSI, video RSSI. So let's go to Calibrate Compass. We want to change the color on that. And we go down to Calibrate Compass, select, and it's transparent, and it's bright yellow. And here's how many colors we can change it to. So let's change it to a light blue. And there you have it. It's changed to light blue. You can change it to any one of those colors. It's got a blink option here, which I don't think it's going to show us, but you can make it blink. I don't know if it works for every single thing on here. Obviously you don't want your GPS coordinates to be sitting there blinking and flashing at you. I don't know if I would like anything flashing. But that's it. I mean, you can pretty much get it now. You can go and change the color of any of these. So for the Calibrate Compass, I'm going to set that to yellow or green and leave it at that. And I'm going to change my GPS coordinates. And make them red. There. I'm going to leave it just like that. So once I've made the changes and made the colors the way I want them, I'm going to click Save. And it's showing me that it's been created. Basically, it's just changed that firmware file. So now that firmware file that I have on my desktop, when I load it or install it into my TX, this is the display of my TX. This is the colors I'm going to get. The only color change I made was down here on the quad GPS coordinates. So when we load that into the transmitter, that's how it's going to appear. And that's how you do that one. And then for the flight control, same method. We're going to select my flight control, load it in here, and here's all the parameters that are installed on that firmware, not my quad. They're loaded on the firmware. And the same parameters are all in there, your return to home speed, your height, and all that, but you notice you have a lot more here. I don't know any more than what I've already showed you, but you can go in and change your safe altitude. I can set that to 25 meters. Your return to home, your alarm landings right here for 6.8 volts and your 6.4 volts. Here's our speed. I'm going to change that to 7, and that's it. So my return to home is set for 25 meters. My return to home speed is set for 7 meters per second, and my altitude is still at 250 up here, and that's all I'm changing. So then I would click Save, which I'm not going to do because I don't know if I want to do that to this firmware right now because I might forget. But I would normally click Save, and then it saves it to that file, and then you have to take that file and install it like you do normal firmware, install it onto your quad. So that's it, guys. That's how you do the firmware modification to change your speed, your height for return to home, stuff like that. So hopefully you found this useful and helpful to do it successfully. I'm glad it worked out to where I had to plug in the battery on mine, because now we don't have to answer that question. That's all taken care of. I don't need to do a separate video on that one. And again, I just want to repeat, please be safe with it. Just do the right thing and resist the temptation of flying up into the clouds. Planes fly up there. Planes fly all over the place. So at least in the United States, it's definitely not safe to go up above the clouds or even close to that. If you can see a plane and get to that height, that's just, you're asking for trouble, and that's just, I don't need to explain the rest. Anyhow, that's it. Hopefully this helps, and everybody be safe. Thanks.